Rabbi Menachem Penner is the Executive Vice President of the Rabbinical Council of America, and for the past 11 years, he's been the Dean of RIETS, Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary at Yeshiva University. Prior to that, Rabbi Penner was the Senior Rabbi at Young Israel of Holliswood, New York for 20 years. He's the one person whose name has come up more times on this podcast than anyone else's, as having been an influence in regards to the mindset and the methodology behind giving a great drasha. Needless to say, this episode of the Maggid Method is a pretty big event. In today's conversation, Rabbi Penner lays out the sky-high stakes facing anyone who shares Divrei Torah in a public setting.
People don't necessarily assume that Rabbi X is boring, or even that rabbis are boring, but that chas v'shalom, the Torah is boring. And that's something, obviously, that we can never present.
Rabbi Penner also explains the one goal you should aim for with your drasha.
What you're trying to do is to try to establish over the course of years that you're a person who is insightful, and your insight comes from a knowledge of the Torah. And then when a person happens to be at a Parshas Drachim, you're a person to turn.
We discuss the stark reality that you will not change most people's lives by any one drasha that you deliver.
A healthy, normal, well-adjusted balabas is not going to make a major change in his or her life because of something you said on Shabbos morning.
We talk about the doldrums of the rabbinate, that nagging feeling that surfaces from time to time that maybe I'm not making a difference in people's lives.
It's challenging sometimes in the Rabbanos. Sometimes people feel in the Rabbanos they're just filling a slot. They're just going week to week. They're not making a change. They're not helping people grow.
Next, we go into the nuts and bolts of drasha preparation, beginning with your ability to articulate what exactly you intend to talk about.
To be able to say that in a sentence is the hardest thing.
How long you should spend looking for what to say, and how to know when you found something.
So pick something to speak about after 20% of your time, and that's going to drastically improve your speaking. What are you looking for? So you're looking for a wow.
And how the kids show Blue's Clues provides the perfect mushel for how you should approach your drasha preparation.
The thinking chair, I think, is one of the most important pieces of the drasha. To think about what the ideas are really saying, to think about what people really need to hear.
I learned so much from my interview with Rabbi Menachem Penner, and I'm sure you will too. So now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Rabbi Menachem Penner.
Good morning. Thank you so much for making this time. I know you're super busy.
Sorry, yeah. Well, I'd say overextended is probably a better way of saying it, but we try at RIETS, we try to, first of all, divide between public speaking and writing a drasha and delivering a drasha. And I think that sometimes we try to do too much at once. And they're very, very different skills to be able to speak, to be able to actually be able to speak properly, to have eye contact, to pause properly, to use voice modulation, all of those pieces. So I think that historically we used to try to teach that together with how to write a drasha and how to develop a drasha. And the reality is that a drasha is really more like a written piece, like a written sermon. Not that I necessarily suggest writing out your sermon, but you can make a complete division between the content and the style and the words used and all this and that, and the actual delivery, which is a learned skill. So you could have someone who is an excellent writer and has absolutely no public speaking skills. So what we try to do is, first of all, divide between those two things. There used to be sort of one course in RIETS on giving drashas, sermonics, and now it's divided into 2 semesters of public speaking with Toastmasters types, really working primarily on delivering anything. It really is the same thing. You could practically hand them the material and then try to have them deliver it, as opposed to then graduating to the point of working on the sermons themselves and working on the content. So I think that's an important division to make. And really, when you're practicing, when you're getting better, so you're really working on preparing the drasha in advance, and then as you're giving the drasha, you're working on trying to, deliver it in a better way. I always recommend to the students to choose one skill that they're trying to work on in a particular drasha and to write it at the top of each page. If you're going for eye content, and you have a written speech, or you're going for voice modulation, or you're going for pausing, whatever it is, just make a little note of that at the top of each page. So as soon as you turn the page, you're reminded again to focus on that. It's very hard when you're actually speaking to focus on improving more than one aspect of what you're doing. It's very much like a golf swing. It's very difficult to work on multiple parts of your golf swing. Not that I have much of a golf swing, but it's very hard to work on multiple parts of that at the same time. You kind of got to get each piece layered in. But I guess it's probably best to talk about the art of writing drashas.
Both, yeah.
More than just the public speaking. I don't know if I have anything particular to add with the public speaking, but drashas is what we work on. The first principle that we share with the students is how important it is to speak exceptionally well. How important it is. I think that, a lot of times people make jokes about the rabbi's speech or the pastor's sermon and sleeping and whatever this and that. And ultimately, it's really a chilul Hashem, because people don't necessarily assume that Rabbi X is boring, or even that rabbis are boring, but that chas v'shalom, the Torah is boring. And that's something, obviously, that we can never present. So if there's a deficiency in the material that's coming across, if it's not stimulating, if you're not being blown out of your chair, if you don't want to reconsider your life when you hear the speech, it's not because of the Dvar Hashem, it's because the delivery is not, is not good enough for what you're trying to bring them. So there's an incredible achrayus that you have, that you're actually HaKadosh Baruch Hu's salesman. And you can downplay it and say it's just a Dvar Torah, it's just a Drasha. And you know what? On any given day, it might be. But the combined effort that a rabbi who has a pulpit produces, or even if you're just one piece of many, you're one piece of many Divrei Torah that a person hears over the course of a year, they're judging the Torah, they're judging the Ribono Shel Olam based on your words, not necessarily you. And this even goes down, I tell the guys, even to a Dvar Torah you're giving at a friend's ofruf. If you give a rambling Dvar Torah at a friend's ofruf, it's a shtickle chilul Hashem. It's not just a question of that you may not get a good shidduch because people won't think so highly of you at your friend's ofruf. It's a shtickle chiddush Hashem. So I think that's the first thing that I try to explain to them: the responsibility that we have to work on our drashas, to work on our speaking, to make sure that we're coming across that way. The second thing that's really important is that I try to explain to the Talmidim, and I have a difficult time at first explaining this to them, that the way people view you is also going to be very dependent on the quality of your speaking and the insights that you're bringing across when you're speaking. I share with my Talmidim at the beginning of every Drasha workshop, at the beginning of the semester, that the shocking and difficult message that a given Shabbos morning Drasha is not going to change people's lives. And it's not even going to change what they're doing about the topic that you're speaking about. A healthy, normal, well-adjusted balabas is not going to make a major change in his or her life because of something you said on Shabbos morning. I grew up working in the NCSY world. That was not true. I grew up in a world where kids were holding at a place that anything they heard could change their trajectory for life. Most people, most of the time, are not in that place. It's what I'd call a parshas drachim, right? Most people are not at a crossroads. Sometimes adults also are at a crossroads. And by the way, that's when they change too. But you can't count on adults being at a crossroad in Parshas Yisro, in shul. What you're trying to do is to try to establish over the course of years that you're a person who is insightful, and your insight comes from a knowledge of the Torah. And then when a person happens to be at a Parshas Drachim, you're a person to turn to. Rabbis tend to change lives not because of something they say that morning, because people aren't open on a given morning to make a change. And that's not a cynical thing. That's just the reality. I don't want them. I wouldn't want them to change everything based on every drasha I say every single 52 weeks a year, that would be an incredible power that would be very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Sometimes in a situation with a shul of Balei Tshuva, you have such a situation, but the rabbi has to be super, super careful. That's not a typical shul situation. But it does mean that over the course of time, people begin to say, hey, the rabbi gets me. The rabbi gets Torah. I think the rabbi is a good person to speak to. Now, sometimes you don't want those Parshas Drachim to come around, because sometimes they're caused by tragedy or midlife crisis or whatever it is. But your goal week in and week out, and it's not 52 drushes because it's 70 drushes with the Yom Tovim and it's Shiurim and it's Divrei Torah. The person hears you 300 times over the course of the year. And what's the combined effect of that? Hopefully, is that here's somebody I could turn to if I needed to. I don't need to now. But people hit that moment when they do need somebody. Mm-hmm. And it's those moments that all the combined effect of the drushos can make a difference, and somebody can turn to you and say, hey, Rabbi, what's my next step? Hey, Rabbi, how can I proceed from here? And I think that's really the goal of the drushos, besides Talmud Torah, besides at a simcha, making the simcha very, very powerful and important. But it's to let people know that Torah has something to say about their lives in 2024. Torah is relevant. Now, by the way, none of this means that a drasha shouldn't be practical and shouldn't give specific examples, perhaps, of what you should change. This is one of the hardest things that I try to explain to the students.
Yeah.
The drasha needs to get to a point where a person is sitting in the seat and says, that's a great idea. I should do that. They won't, because there's something about cholent that just erases whatever the rabbi did. Maybe we need to ban cholent. But what you want is that every single Shabbos, they're in the seat and they say, yeah, that's a good idea. The examples that you're giving, the next steps that you're giving are right on. Once in a while, they'll maybe change something for a little bit. But it doesn't take away. People assume that since the drasha is not going to change the people on that morning, therefore it could be up here. And once in a while it can. A rabbi doesn't need to do the same thing every week, and he shouldn't. He has to keep himself interested. He has to keep them interested. But the idea is to get to the point where they would want to change, and the example is the right example. And that establishes in their mind that, wow, the Torah has something to tell me in 2024, not just as a Dvar Torah, not just because I want to learn something, but when I'm making life decisions, the Torah is the guide. And I think I now have a person in my life who can give me access to that wisdom. So in that sense, a drasha is so much more than a good Dvar Torah on Shabbos morning. It is packaging, messaging, the Ribbono Shel Olam, the Torah, and the rabbi. And the rabbi is not important in and of himself. It's not job security, although it is. It's not about job security, but it's about your being able to serve the role for which you went into the rabbinate, which was to be able to help people. And people really need to be ready, right? There's a great word from the Kutzker that says by the Shema, they're supposed to put these dvarim al levavecha, right? It's supposed to pshat al levavecha. Right? So you know the word. So he says, those hearts are not open. You can't put it bil avavecha, but you put it al avavecha. And then something happens externally that makes your heart open, the whole thing falls in. That's the job of the rabbi. You know, you can't force hearts to open. Maybe, there are moments in the calendar year. The Ribbono Shel Olam set up the year that there are going to be these moments. It's not always the same thing every day. There are going to be moments which are supposed to jar you. But usually the things that really jar us are life circumstances that can't be predicted. It's for that reason that you have to just keep establishing that the Torah is relevant, the Torah is important, the Torah has what to say, the Torah has what to say, not just about the world, but the Torah has to say about your life, your family. The key to your marriage is in the Torah. The key to your personal fulfillment and happiness is in the Torah. And I'm going to try to help you show that. I'm going to help find that with you.
Wow. So you have to speak as if you bring them to the place of change, fully knowing that a healthy individual may not be ready to change at that moment, but it's that constant, steady drip, week in, week out, Yom Tov, Yom Menarayim, and then eventually at the right time, you become that ambassador. You've built that trust. You built that credibility. Yeah.
Right. And you have to be willing to use it sometimes. A rabbi learns, there's a flip side to it. I actually give 2 semesters in a row in their senior year. I don't mean to use very school-sounding terms, but Lamaisa, they go for 4 years of smicha. So in the fall, we work on the drashas very heavily. And in the spring, we keep working on the drashas, but I go through all the life cycle events. And I talk to them about establishing a real kesher nafshi with people through life cycle. So it's actually a combination of showing that you're an access to the advice they need, but B, having a investing heavily over years and years in a relationship with them. Because if you have the knowledge, but you're too distant, they may not be willing to do it, and you may not feel comfortable to. It's sort of getting to the point where you could put your arm around somebody and say, I think you're ready for a next step. And that person being in the place and saying, if there's a next step, every week I hear the rabbi, he says good things. He's probably a good guy to suggest my next step. That's how I find that people grow with help of the rabbi.
Yeah. It sounds very reciprocal. It sounds like the pastoral work serves to further the connection and the relationship, the trust. And then at the same time, the drasha also kind of makes people open enough to seek out pastoral help. And they kind of, it's like a two-way street.
Right. Yeah. Right. And it works. And it's not even necessarily just seeking the pastoral help. The pastoral help sometimes is just pastoral help. And that builds a trust and builds a relationship and builds a connection that allows for that growth. It's challenging sometimes in the Rabbanos. Sometimes people feel in the Rabbanos they're just filling a slot. They're just going week to week. They're not making a change. They're not helping people grow. I grew up in Fair Lawn, New Jersey. I saw Rabbi Benjamin Yudin change countless lives over 10, 15, 20 years. The Rabbanos is very different than Chinuch, where especially and Kiruv in NCSY, if I spoke at a Havdalah in NCSY, I could change 12 kids' life in a second with the right speech. It wasn't always the right speech. But if I gave the right speech, 12 kids' lives could be changed in an instant. That's what it means to be 16, 17, unattached, everything's in front of you. With adults, you have to be much more patient. But the kinds of changes that you see over time when you develop relationships with them and you're able to guide them and bring them is very, very powerful. It's a Yetzer Hara for rabbis to go to a shul 3-5 years, go to another shul, go to a bigger shul. But if you're doing your job well, your impact is growing exponentially with each year. Exponentially with each year if you're doing the right thing, if you keep speaking well, if you keep deepening those relationships. A rabbi who's known somebody for 20 years, you can't compare that, how much you can, a wink, a suggestion, a something, can keep moving people forward.
Yeah. Do you find that it's difficult with the every new generation of students? People are much more looking for quicker results faster. They want to achieve things faster. Maybe they're unsure as to how to measure their success if they don't see results quickly. Is that?
I think so. But the fact is, in every shul there are successes as well. There are short-term successes. There are people who happen to be at a Parshas Drachim right in the beginning. There are hopefully Balei Tshuva and Pegerim who are growing and this and that. So, I'm talking about sort of a typical from birth kind of situation which makes up a lot of the shul, but I think there are also lots of opportunities to be involved in kiruv, to make a really big difference at a bedside too. So I don't know that one needs to wait. I just think a person can't become too cynical about the overall level of the shul. I came here, it was at level X. I just don't see it going to level Y after a year. it really takes time to do that, but I do think one needs to celebrate those little successes and see those little changes, and be open to that. Be open to that. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about the about how you approach the drashas in teaching the students. Do you start working on the structure? Do you work on kind of the limits and boundaries of drash?
One of the things that, I guess there are many things that we do, be hours, and it's about a 15-hour course with a lot of practicing and all this and that, and then we're following up on individual drashas. But there are several things that we're trying to work on. I think the most important thing that I'm asking them to do is to present a real insight of some sort. A real insight of some sort. I asked
original insight.
Not an original insight at all. Not original insight. I could talk about that, but a real insight. Each drasha should have, I believe, and I ask the students to present this before they present their idea. When we go over their drashas and we practice week to week, they don't stand up behind the pulpit and give it, because I'm not working on public speaking at that point. I want them to present the idea in a couple of minutes. What are the pieces, etc. I'm not working on their speaking anymore. I'm working just on the content, which again is kind of a new thing for them, that we're just focusing down on the content. The first thing I ask them to do is present the thesis statement that they're going to present. And that really irks them. For the first 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks, it just drives them crazy. I had a mentor in my rabbinic training who was very tough on me. So I'm not going to say it was very tough. But he would ask me Friday night before I gave my speech Shabbos day, he would say, "What are you speaking about tomorrow?" And I would say, "Well, Rashi says," and that. He says, No, what are you speaking about tomorrow? What are you talking about? And I asked the students to give a statement about what it is they're talking about. Not the vort. It's most often not the vort. It rarely has a pasuk in it, a parshan in it, in anything. What are you saying? What's the insight that you're giving? The insight is usually not just a Dvar Torah. The Dvar Torah very often is a proof for the insight. Proves that idea. But what's the idea that you're trying to get across? And that's really the crux of what we're trying to create. What's the message that you're trying to give across? And to be able to say that in a sentence is the hardest thing. But I tell them, how is your audience supposed to take away your message if you can't say it? If you can't say it in a sentence? And I'm constantly pushing them to move away from trite ideas and trite messages. We speak very often in the Drasha workshop about the message basket. The message basket is the place you go after you have a good vort and you know you're supposed to say a practical message. So you just pick something out of the message basket. And that kills the drasha usually. And it not only does it kill the drasha, it also kills their confidence in you, because you're always saying the same thing. You're always just saying, you got to learn more with your kids. You got to talk less in davening, some brilliant Dvar Torah about Yisro and is this, and the message is you got to talk less in davening.
Right. And in closing, we should all strive to be like Moshe Rabbeinu.
It just, I think that the message or the insight that you're trying to give them, you're trying to convince them of something. You're trying to convince them of something, an idea, that if you do X, it will lead to something, right? You need to learn with your children, because your children primarily will grow. I'm not doing this well on this podcast, but because your children will primarily grow based on the view they have of their parents. Mm-hmm. It's true or not true, but that's a thesis, right? Children develop primarily by watching their parents. Okay, that's not obvious. You could argue, and you need to then argue that idea out, very often with a friend, a chavrusa, a spouse, as an idea. The drasha is simply the proofs that you're bringing in order to make that point. But the idea of the drasha in the end of the day is not the Rashi, is not the Ramban, is not the great Vort. It's the great Vort proves an idea. I speak to them about two different kinds of proofs for their thesis. One I call a kra, and one I call a svara, something the Gemara uses very often, a kra and a svara. But a kra here means that the proof is that Rashi said it. The proof is the Medrash said it. That's one level. That's usually the way we support our drashos, by saying the Medrash says it, therefore it's true. That's true. But for a typical person in the seat, you often need a svara as well. You also need a convincing, logical, rational argument why it's so. So what I'm looking for in a drasha is for them to present a compelling, interesting insight, something they want the people to know at the end of the drasha, and then how are you supporting that? What do you bring to that? And that's not the way people are used to making a Divrei Torah. I don't know. You open up a sefer and you have a nice idea and you figure out where it goes. No. And again, I'm a big believer that a rabbi doesn't have to do the same thing every week. I don't think he always has to have a message, and I don't think he always has to have a deep insight. The goal this week could be to learn together. The goal this week could be to enhance a simcha. The goal this week. But A, you have to then know that that's your goal. And B, you have to state that that's your goal. Sometimes I'll get up and I'll say, this week I don't have a message for you. I just want to learn with you these few psukim. They're so fascinating. That's it. But don't then have the message. It's better to leave off the message altogether at the end if you don't have, if you're not trying to say something insightful. But most of the time, in most situations, the rabbi's trying to make a point. And we spend so little time on that point. We spend so much time developing the drasha, and then at the end we get to what the point is. If your goal, you have to know what your goal is when you're starting the drasha. If the goal is to convince them of something, then convince them. Convince them. Don't spend, 16 minutes analyzing the psukim and then 2 minutes convincing him. It's not going to convince them. They're not going to come away. And again, remember that the goal of the rabbi, ultimately with the drasha, is to be a person who has insightful ideas that matter to me, not simply to be a study partner, right? An effective rabbi is not simply someone I go to learn Torah with. That's good. But really how a rabbi can change people's lives is when they go to him to understand the next step for them. And for that, he has to convince them not just that he knows the Mara Makomos, but that he can make a salient point. He has good ideas.
Yeah.
You asked about whether those ideas are original. I am not a believer in the ideas being original at all. I don't think that that's a rabbi's role per se. I think it keeps him sharp. I think it makes it interesting for him. And I think that once in a while, it's nice to show you can come up with an original idea. But b'derech klal, I don't see that as a goal of the rabbi. The rabbi is the access between the person and all the books behind them. And there's a lot of books.
Yeah.
There's a lot of books. I see that as a role. I learned that from Rabbi Maurice Lamb of blessed memory. I once had a day with Maurice Lamb. They used to offer this to young rabbis.
Hey there, fellow podcast listeners. Are you enjoying the show so far? There's a secret that great public speakers know. Did you know there's a method for cutting straight through to an audience's heart, grabbing their attention and holding it, and making a memorable impact with your presentation? The best speakers in the world utilize it, and now you can too, every time you get up to speak. Download your free Maggid Method of Public Speaking template at maggidmethod.com, maggidmethod.com. The Maggid Method will teach you how to find your authentic voice, craft meaningful presentations, manage people's attention, and build unbreakable bonds with your audience. Go to maggidmethod.com and download your free copy now. Now let's get back to the program.
I once had a day with Maurice Lamb. They used to offer this to young rabbis. And you could ask Rabbi Maurice Lamb whatever you wanted. So he spent some of the day talking about drashas. So he asked me how I come up with a drasha. So I said, well, I look at the Parsha, look at Rashi's and Ramban, the basic Rishonim, and I try to think whatever. And he looks at me like I'm from Mars. And he says, come here. And he brings me back to his study, this massive wall of Drasha Sfarim with little things coming out of it. They didn't have Post-it notes then, just little whatever's sticking out of everything. And he said, with all due respect, these people have much better ideas than you do, which is true.
Yeah.
Why would you give them lower quality ideas that are yours instead of the best things that have ever been written just because you're not the author? It doesn't mean that the koach of Chiddush isn't important in a metaphysical way, in a personal way. Chiddush has its place. But on a week-to-week basis, a rabbi who's coming up with all the stuff himself is not, there's no chance that he's saying the best stuff, the most important things to his balabas. There's, in the Svarim that have been written already, there's tremendous, tremendous ideas. So why would you deprive your balabatim of that nourishment, you know, in order to be constantly, you put a little twist on it, or whatever. Now, I don't think there's any, you shouldn't claim it's yours. And I don't think there's any loss in claiming that you brought it from somebody else. I tell them all the time, the balabatim would much rather you gave a phenomenal drasha and say it was somebody else's idea than give an okay drasha and it was your idea. They're not looking for originality here. If you're a scholar in residence, so you're expected to produce your own material. If you're doing stand-up comedy, so you can't say, I took this whole Seinfeld routine and here it is. You know, you can't do that. But the role of the rabbi is to be the conduit to the wisdom that's out there.
It would seem to me that the darshanim of yesteryear, like Rabbi Lamb and Rabbi Lookstein, and I mean that seemed to be. I think they didn't approach the role of the rabbi that way. They seem to be darshanim. They seem to produce original insights week after week. And
I think there's a difference between the sources themselves, and if you read Rabbi Lamb's drasha, he's almost always taking it from somewhere. Very often a Hasidic source, interestingly, and the message of where I take it. The message of where I take it. The Sfarim themselves will rarely have the point itself. The insight itself is a powerful thing, and that you need to that's where the creativity comes. And the putting it together and the putting the story and I'm not suggesting that a person reads someone else's drasha, but the core vort itself is something that there's no reason to necessarily be coming up with that oneself. And the powerful, insightful ideas, again, Rabbi Lamb was Rabbi Lamb. You know, Rabbi Sachs in his books and Lahavdil was the Rav is saying a lot of original stuff. But you're not the Rav, I'm not the Rav. You know, there are great thinkers. And some of the most famous darshanim of yesteryear are people who really are known to be great thinkers, who also happen to be terrific speakers. But I think that for the average person getting up on a Shabbos, the average Rav getting up, he'll do much better by finding the idea in the thought of the Rav, in the thought of Rav Hutner, in the thought of whatever, and then to present that over with a modern application and with a very specific thing that says, I get where you are, I know what your next step is, and things like that. But I think that the most important thing is that the drasha be great. If you're good enough that you can come up week after week with Rabbi Lamb's stuff, I don't think that the average person can do that. And I dare say that the stresses on the rabbi today are such that you can't spend 10 hours or 15 hours on a drasha. You have to spend a lot of time, more time than rabbis think. But there's only so much time that's available. And the fact is, a week that you're half off is a great week to try to be machadish something that week. But a typical week, you're caring for people, you're running, you're doing things, you're running things on Erev Shabbos. So it's a question of prioritizing great material over personal chiddush and this and that in most places. Maybe there are, prime pulpits around the world and prime speeches. And again, I think if you go as a speaker or a scholar in residence, You gotta develop your own stuff. But for a typical rabbi in a typical pulpit in the 500 such shuls in the country here, I don't think that's what it is.
Yeah. So I'm curious about the message, the thesis. So is that born out of the Kra, or is it, do you approach it from the fact that, okay, this is a message the Kehillah needs to hear, and let's go searching to support it with a Svara, with a Kra? Or do you just say?
It's an excellent question, and it goes both ways. Most of the time it emerges organically from the material itself. There were many weeks where the people would say, Rabbi, why did you say that this week? What happened? I'm like, I came across it in a sefer and it seemed like a good thing to say. I'm glad that they thought so highly that every single week I had something that I, curated for that week. There are going to be times that there's a specific message you want to give and you're going to work backwards. That's pretty tough. It's pretty tough. It's pretty tough within a particular parsha. Obviously, you're going to want to do that at certain times of the year, Yom Naraim, Shabbos Hagadol, Shabbos Shuvah, a given time after something's going on in Eretz Yisrael, you're not going to look at the parsha and say, hey, what should I talk about this week? But I think that for most rabbis who aren't masters of Jewish thought, you're going to be emerging naturally from the sources and from the messages. But I think that rabbis need to be open to what the text is really saying. I can't pull off the top of my head now a good example, but that's where I really encourage rabbis, even when a Divrei Torah seems to be heading in a certain direction, not to go for the message basket, not to assume that it leads into a trite message. So it's not simply that the ideas should be deep, but the Vortluch themselves, the Divrei Torah themselves, are often much deeper. The Ramban is often saying something much, much more profound than just one more Torah. And you have to be willing to listen to the Ramban when he's talking to you. It's not learning Ramban; it's listening to a Ramban. There's a famous kids show that used to be called Blues Clues. So I think that the Chachma and Blues Clues, they got all these clues. I mean, there was a lot of not Chachma and Blues Clues. It's probably better for stand-up comedy than it is for a drasha. But after they get all the clues, he has this thinking chair. And you can nod or you can pretend that you don't know what I'm talking about. But he has, he sits in his thinking, it's this big blue chair, and he sits in his thinking chair and he tries to put all the pieces together. The thinking chair, I think, is one of the most important pieces of the drasha. Once you have some ideas, and then maybe we'll talk in a moment just about how to find that idea. But once you're in your chair, once you have your ideas, to think about what the ideas are really saying, to think about what this really means, to think about what your message really is, to think about what people really need to hear. Very often we don't get to that stage in the drashas. We kind of just find something and we kind of write up some notes, and then it's astonishing what 15 minutes in a thinking chair does to your drasha. 15 minutes in today's world is hours. Like sometimes you just feel like you're losing your mind. But to really think of what is that drasha really saying? Very often we'll come up with something in the drasha workshop where somebody's saying something, they present a vort, they present the message, and say, no, go back to the vort. That vort is unbelievable what it's saying. It's not saying the trite thing that you're taking from it. It's saying something so profound about human nature. But to do that, you have to ponder it. And I don't think we do a lot of pondering. Maybe when we're learning lumdus, we ponder, right? People who are used to learning lumdus, learning a Tosfos, learning a Ramban may have that moment, depending on which yeshiva they learned in, where they kind of walk around and think about it, right?
Misboning.
What?
To be misboning, to contemplate.
Yeah, to really think, what is it saying? I went to Gush. And Gush is like a very quiet base, at least it was 35 years ago. It was a very quiet base medrash with a lot of people, and people just walk around. They look like they're crazy. But they were thinking about what is it really saying? And that is so profound with a drasha. And that's, by the way, the difference between what the Balabatim have time to think about and what the rabbi can think about. It's a 15-minute difference. It's that people today don't have 15 minutes to ponder something, to really think about why. Everybody knows that it's supposed to do that. Why don't they do it? Every time they give a drasha, I say to them, but people what was the audience thinking before you came into the room? Were they thinking it was good to learn Torah or bad to learn Torah? What were they thinking you were going to say before you walked into the room? And how did you convince them? So, very often we're telling people things in the drasha that they know they should do, but they're not. So the answer is not to say it louder or to say it again, but to say, hey, wait a minute, why do good people who want to do this not get there? What's stopping them? That's 15 minutes in the think. It's not 3 hours, actually. It's 15 minutes. It could be 5 minutes in a thinking chair, and you have insights because you actually thought about it. And people in the day-to-day hustle and bustle and the world today of 140 character messages, and people don't think. And that's the rabbi's job, is to think for the people. They might also come up with the answer if you engaged them in a conversation about it, but they just don't have time. They have 15 minutes a week to listen to something, and you're it. Or maybe, if you're doing podcasts, maybe more than 15 minutes. But that's sort of the role of the rabbi. So I think the messages most often emerge from the text, but it's not simply that you pick the text and then, and then that's what you talk about this Shabbos, or you pick the idea, but that you really listen to what the text is going to say, because, it may come as a shock, but Rishonim were more profound than we think they were, and some of these things, are really, really profound. And for that, you could find those, in a lot of places. Let me discuss for a minute how to, what I advise them about preparing for a drasha, because I think this is, there's two things that I really talk to them about. I share with them an experience that I had. One of my first drashas was in Lincoln Square Synagogue as an intern. On Parshas.
Shaul Robinson, I spoke to him last week.
It was wonderful. So I was there. I was a rabbinic intern in Lincoln Square Synagogue. I was like 24 years old, and I was asked to speak Parshas Noach. And I couldn't find anything to talk about. Now, we're talking Parshas Noach. It wasn't Tazria. It was Noah. And I couldn't find anything. I spent like 15 hours trying to find something to make a drasha, and I couldn't find anything. And I went to somebody's house, and they gave me an empty apartment for Shabbos to stay in, me and my wife and my little daughter. And I spent the whole night like trying to figure out what to talk about Parshas Noach. And I couldn't find anything. And I came up with something, and it was okay. And I said it very loudly because I tried to make up for the fact that I didn't have good content with good presentation. Yeah. By the way, once I was at I made a very big deal in my time in the shul of giving very, very powerful simcha drashas, because I think that really connects you to the family. And there was a particular situation where I just wasn't doing it. I didn't have the stuff, and I knew it, and I was speaking very, very loudly. And my 3-year-old son was sitting behind me next to the rabbi's chair, and I made a pregnant pause after the vort as I turned to the family. And my 3-year-old son said, "Abba, you're giving me such a headache." It was like by the way, I did that back to him at his bar mitzvah. I held on to it for 10 years till his bar mitzvah speech. But he got it that I was compensating for. He saw right. He saw right. He listened to me every week, even as a 3-year-old. Like he was clued in. So, so that particular Shabbos Noach, not only was I struggling to find something, but I must have spent 15 minutes going through Svar. 15 hours going through flipping. I call it flipping. Take every book off your shelf. You're flipping. No, the Ramban has nothing to say. No, Rabbi Lamb has nothing to say. Nobody has anything to say on this week's parsha. It's unbelievable. And then I was asked to give a Divrei Torah at lunch, just off the cuff. So I said, "Oh, Rabbi, you have a Divrei Torah," and I had nothing, which meant that I didn't even gain anything from the 15 hours of flipping through the Svarim. I got nothing. I had nothing. How is that possible? So what I try to advise to the students is as follows. Drashas need to be developed. They're rarely there in their perfect form when you find them. it's very important to set a time limit for how much time I'm going to flip before I start really working on the drasha. And I think it should only be about 20% of the time that you have. So if you have 5 hours to write a drasha, after 1 hour, you should find the thing that you're going to make into a drasha, because the reality is that anything can be made into a good drasha. Anything, if you spend time on it and you develop at it and you sit in the thinking chair and you work on it and you add things to it and you put a story in and you put this and that. And what happens is very often we spend 4.5 of the 5 hours looking for what to say and then only 30 minutes trying to make it into something. And the worst vort, if there's such a thing in the Dvar Hashem, the worst vort with 4 hours of work and making it a speech will be much better than the best vort with a half an hour of prep, to try to just squeeze it in there. So I tell them, you need to just set, and I did this for myself after that Shabbos such a learning experience. I did this for myself. I said, I'm going to set a certain amount of time. Again, it changes as you grow in everything, and it depends on how much time you have. But 20% max of the time should be spent figuring out what you're going to talk about. And it doesn't mean you're not done after the 20. You don't have your thing. But after the first 20% of the time, I'm speaking about this pasuk. This is what I'm going to speak about this pasuk. Then I could spend the next 2 hours just looking at every mafarish on that pasuk, and I'm going to hit something. As opposed to just looking through everything on everything. You may not even be able to make a Birchas HaTorah on it. It's mamish, barely even Talmud Torah, because you're frantically just flipping and flipping and flipping. So pick something to speak about after 20% of your time, and that's going to drastically improve your speaking. What are you looking for?
Yeah.
What are you looking for? So you're looking for a wow. You're looking for a wow, and there's no other word that I use to describe it. You're looking for a wow. You're looking for something, when you see it, you go, interesting. Interesting. The fact that you can't at that moment figure out how that's going to turn into a whole drasha, the fact that at that moment you're not exactly sure where to go with the message from that idea, you have 4 hours now to figure that out, and you will figure that out. But what you're looking for is something that you stumble across that on that given week makes you something. You feel a wow. You feel a something. You feel a moment. Something hit. Something. That's what's going to make the drasha. If a drasha doesn't have a wow, if it's not that moment that people say, right, that's the face you're going for. Right? You want to get them. That's all you need to make a great drasha. And that's what you have, let's say, in a 5-hour model or in a 10-hour model, 1 or 2 hours to find something that is very interesting. Now, by the way, you don't need to find that on that given Thursday or Friday. I think a person who's going to be, one of the things I tell the fellas is that, you're going to be speaking hundreds of times this year. Hundreds. There's no limit to how much chomer you need. So everything that you see that's ever interesting, just photocopy it and put it in a folder, whether it's a physical folder for an old guy like me, or it's a folder online, and use OneNote or whatever, Evernote. Yeah. Just, you can never have enough chomer. You burn through hundreds of ideas every single year. On a Tisha B'Av, I do one of those long explanatory Tisha B'Avs. I could burn through 25, 30 ideas or stories on one day on Tisha B'Av. So you'll never have enough material. So in an optimal world, you're not just looking on Thursday or Friday for a Dvar Torah. You've put something aside. The challenge that people have is that they have a folder that says Drasha ideas. And a folder that says Drasha ideas is not very useful. So a folder that has good ideas for drashas is not functional, because who has time to look at that on a given week? It has nothing to do. Most of the material has nothing to do with you on a given Thursday or Friday or Wednesday, whatever it is. It's critical when you put things away to put the name of a Yom Tov or the name of a Parsha on top, even if it's not a perfect fit. And even if it could fit in 12 Parshas, pick a Parsha, put it in that Parsha. You open up, you have 17 ideas. As you go along the years, you have so many juicy ideas. Don't spend the time figuring out how you're going to make it a drasha when you put it away. Just say, wow, that's an interesting insight. By the way, that's very often not in Parsha Svar. That's very often in Machshava Svar, in Musar Svar. You're reading something in the Rav, you're reading something in Rabbi Steinsaltz, you're reading something in the Michtav Eliyahu, you're reading something, whatever sefer you're reading, and you say, that's interesting. If that's interesting, that's a drasha. Which parsha could I use this for? Which Yom Tov could I use this for? And often the best ideas, because again, we're going for an idea more than we're going for the vort, the best ideas you're often not going to find in the Parsha Svar. You're going to find in the Svarim of thinkers. Not that the Ramban wasn't a thinker, but the Ramban's goal there wasn't. He was trying to explain the pasuk as much as he was trying to present a profound idea.
Yeah.
So very often Svarim that are even the Ramban's Machshava Svarim, very often those are going to be the best places to find the profound idea that I'm going to share. And then you work backwards and you say, which parsha can I include this with? And, how do you get there?
Yeah. I know we said an hour, and I don't want to use more of your time. Maybe we can schedule a part 2 at some point, because this was so fascinating. Most people don't spend the time on the idea the way that you have, and I'm glad we got to explore that. Technique is great, and structure is interesting also, but how to. It sounds to me like the real chachma is the skill is to be able to pull that thesis statement, that message out of the Divrei Torah, which is that's what you're aiming for with the students. Sounds
right.
Like
that's what's going to make a Divrei Torah great. The book Good to Great. That's what I start with them. I say you're all good. They're not all good, but I say you're all good, but good is not good enough. This is it. Shabbos morning drasha. That's it. That's what people. We start with Rabbi Lamb's. I don't know if anyone's mentioned Rabbi Lamb's article, The Art of the Notes of a Repentant Darshan. That's where I said, this is really important. It's an art. It's something you develop over your career, and it just sets up everything else in the rabbinate. It sets up everything else. It's not the point. And if you think it's the point, then you're not gonna do the steps that you have to capitalize on it. But a rabbi who's saying profound ideas on a week-by-week basis, a rabbi who people say, I don't know if I feel like going to shul today, but I want to hear the rabbi speak. That's what we're going for. We're not going for that they should stay awake during your speech, although that's a good sign. But we're going for a shul environment where people say, where the rabbi goes away for Shabbos and people are like, it's not going to be special this Shabbos. We can get there, but it takes a lot of work to be able to get there.
Yeah. There's a great quote that I read once. There was a crime novelist, and he said, "If my story doesn't keep me up writing it, how is it going to keep people up at night reading it?" You got to pour everything you have into it, and
that's also why it's important. I tell people to vary what they're doing, because I say you have to be excited about it. You have to be, and it's not going to work every week. There are going to be weeks where a mentor once told me there are going to be weeks where you're like, I can't wait these next 5 minutes to give over this idea. And there are going to be weeks where you say, I can't believe I'm speaking in 5 minutes. There's going to be both, but week to week, it's got to be something that you feel excited about it. You have to share that excitement with them. It has to be just effusive. They have to just feel like you can't wait to just get this thing out there. And by the way, I think that you give that over at the very, very beginning of the speech. A rabbi who seems reluctant to get into the idea. I'm not a fan of a rabbi making like announcements. Some have that. They make a couple of announcements and then they get into the speech. I think that makes the audience think that you're being patient. You shouldn't be patient. You should just come out with it. Ask the question. What was Yisro thinking? Why would he leave the life that he had in order to come? It has to be something that's like, you just, and that happens by the way you walk up to the pulpit, by the way you start your drasha. It's something that you almost can't control. It's this thing, and that's the excitement of week to week. Hopefully it doesn't always work out that way, but that's what we're going for.
Yeah, nothing like it. Okay. All right. So to be continued. I really very much value your time. I want to give you just a little bit of chizuk because I spoke to Yitzi Sprung in Houston, and he one thing I learned from Rabbi Penner is I don't spend a lot of time looking for an idea. He said I don't. So he incorporated your.
It is. That's what it is. Listen, if you want to just sit and learn, that's something else. But to prepare a speech, it's all about developing and leaving yourself that time to really make it great, and it can be done. It really can be done.
Yeah, I've never thought about it that way. I've spent those 15 hours and come up empty and just pacing right before Yisker on Yom Kippur, still trying to think, what am I going to say?
That's right.
And it's heart pounding, and post Drasha feels like postpartum. You feel like you just gave birth. You're just exhausted.
By the way, if it worked, I'd be okay with the stress of it.
Yeah.
But and once in a while it does. Once in a while, adarabba. Once in a while, your mamish figuring it up as you go out, and they see the creative juices, and it works. But pound for pound, week for week, you're not going to give the same quality material if you can't really curate it, if you can't really think of the examples. Very often I think the last thing we do is think of the examples, because I don't know, there's a lot of good examples. I don't know, you're making that up. Examples are really important. You can offend people. You can send a message that I don't get where you are. I'm not, the worst thing that the rabbi could do is send the message to the Balabatim that he doesn't get it. Right? If his examples are too long, even if his speech is too long, if there's anything about the whole speech that says to the Balabatim, you don't get what it's like to be me. You're not, then you've ruined exactly what you were trying to do with the drasha, which was to say, there's something there that I could share with you that's going to help you. So it's important to do that. It's important to, when it's late, and it's important to give a 5-minute speech, because they say, oh, the rabbi, like, he's one of us. He gets it. He gets it that it's, it's okay. He gets it that, now's not the time. He, if he says something that isn't 1,000%, he says, I think this is true. I can't prove this. And if you're completely honest, if you're completely like them, if you're completely whatever, you score the points that lets them look to you as a resource, as a mentor, and as all those things. So there's much more to say.
Yeah. So where should I point people afterwards? Usually, if there's something that you're working on or you want people to learn more about or follow up.
So you point them to use me. I'll be taking over the RCA on March 1st, and I've been relieved of some of the more administrative parts at YU. I'll still be teaching at YU, but I won't be dealing with all the budgets and the back and forth and all this and that. And that will free me up to basically be there to help rabbis, to give them chizuk, to work on everything, whatever it is they're doing, if I could help them.
All right, take care, Rabbi Penner, and talk around with you.
Rabbi, thanks for doing what you're doing. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to The Maggid Method, and I'm Daniel Steinberg. Learn more about the Maggid Method at maggidmethod.com, maggidmethod.com. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.